Why America won't make a dent in its $31 trillion debt, according to CALM. Budget experts have warned that, absent changes to Social Security and Medicare, a massive wave of spending would accumulate as baby boomers enrolled in benefits and healthcare costs increased since the Reagan era. In the end, that surge would overwhelm the economy, or demographic tsunami, as economist Robert Reischauer, former head of the Congressional Budget Office, put it. The early 2020s or the early 2030s seemed far off to previous presidents and lawmakers as the crisis's start date. Of course, that has already happened. Therefore, the timing of President Biden and Republicans' agreement that these safety net programs are off the table as they compete to reduce the national debt in the coming months couldn't be worse. The biggest contributors to the nation's debt, which is at its highest level as a percentage of the economy since World War II, include Social Security and Medicare. These two programs are not included in negotiations that are serious. Republican budget promises are already improbable. Without significant changes to Social Security and Medicare, they are absurd. It is predicted that both will eventually become insolvent if left unchecked, in 2028 for Medicare and 2034 for Social Security. When he submits his budget request to Congress for the fiscal year beginning in October, Vice President Biden makes the first move in the year's debt dance. In order to reduce deficits by $3 trillion over 10 years, he will propose adjusting Medicare rather than cutting benefits in order to keep it solvent until the 2050s. He is aware that the Republican Party will reject his offer. Because, higher taxes on the wealthy. A deal to strengthen the retirement safety net for future generations before insolvency forces across-the-board benefit cuts will therefore be put off for another year by a president and Congress. However, spare Biden the scorn he would otherwise merit for his lack of leadership. He is correct that neither Medicare nor Social Security should be cut until Republicans abandon their stale, careless opposition to any new taxes. There must be a balance between tax hikes and spending cuts. The math is easy. It also entails shared sacrifice, though. In a recent speech, House Speaker Kevin McCarthy harumphed, "Of all the dangers we face, the greatest threat to our future is our national debt." McCarthy would give up his anti-tax absolutism if he truly believed that the greatest threat existed. He would accept some accountability for his party, particularly for the trillions that have been added to the pot as a result of repeated tax cuts. However, he wouldn't be the speaker for very long after that. McCarthy therefore attributed the debt to runaway spending by the Democrats in his speech. Cuts to Social Security and Medicare are not an option, he continued, without irony. Republicans' mantra that spending is bad ignores the fact that tax cuts increase the debt just as much as spending. Despite 40 years of experience with the tax cuts of Ronald Reagan and George W. Bush, they still insist that tax cuts are unique and pay for themselves. That was refuted by George W. Bush and Donald J. Trump. Even the vice president of the Bush administration admitted as much, when Dick Cheney famously remarked, "Reagan proved deficits don't matter." He was defending the Bush administration's second round of sizable tax cuts amid worries about escalating budget deficits. Recall that Bush inherited an excess. Studies show that, in contrast to many tax cuts, some government spending, particularly on infrastructure, actually does generate a profit for the taxpayers. Furthermore, despite what they may say, Republicans actually support significant levels of federal spending on the military, farm and business subsidies, domestic roads and bridges, disaster relief, and a whole lot more. And even though they join in criticizing Democrats for their big spending, their supporters also appreciate the generosity. Like traditional Republicans, true fiscal conservatives strike a balance between taxes and spending. If spending consistently exceeds revenue, as it has every year for the majority of our lifetimes, regardless of who is in office, that makes an argument for tax increases to bring the budget back into balance. Republicans instead trimmed them. Democrats financed the Affordable Care Act by taxing companies that benefit from providing services to millions of newly insured Americans. Business organizations endorsed the trade-off. However, When Bush and a Republican-majority Congress created Medicare's prescription drug benefit, they placed the cost on the federal government. They even forbade Medicare from haggling for lower prices while working closely with the pharmaceutical industry. However, this ban was lifted by Biden and Democrats last year. His new budget proposes to give Medicare more negotiating power to lower drug prices. Under Trump, Republicans remained mostly mute as the debt increased by $8 trillion. Congress granted his request 3 times, increasing the U.S.'s debt ceiling. Could keep taking out loans to cover its expenses. Republicans don't impose any requirements. But now that a Democrat is in the White House, they've come back as deficit hawks and demand spending cuts before they'll support raising the debt ceiling this summer. However, only 15% of the budget, or nearly everything else the government does and what voters expect it to do, is left after Social Security and Medicare are excluded, along with spending for defense and interest on the debt. The Committee for a Responsible Federal Budget, a centrist organization, estimates that in order to balance the budget in 10 years, 85% of that meager portion of spending would have to be reduced. Even Republicans wouldn't vote for that because it would drastically cut funding for things like Homeland Security, medical research, food and drug safety, air traffic control, and more. Furthermore, they will not support taxes. The threat of a deadlock and a catastrophic default by the global economic superpower is thus raised. The tsunami that financial forecasters anticipated never materialized. However, it would still be a catastrophe. A synthetic one.